What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Made You a Mixtape podcast. I'm your host, Jason. Welcome to the show. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're staying safe. Now, if you like good music podcasts, and I mean really good music podcasts, then I'm guessing that you've probably listened to the She Will Rock You podcast. And joining me today is co-host Leah Jones. Welcome to the show, Leah. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to be here.
So for those of you who haven't listened to the She Will Rock You podcast yet, can you give us a bit of a breakdown as to what they can expect to hear when they listen in?
Yeah, we kind of have two episode formats. So our main episodes are bi-weekly, and they're either me or my co-host Beth Ann just telling the history of a band or an artist, whether it's, a rock group or an influential woman in music. We kind of stray from the rock genre sometimes. We call them rule breakers. And then interspersed throughout those bi-weekly episodes, we have artist interviews with up-and-coming rock artists. Usually it's a lot recently have been female rock artists. We didn't intend to do only females, but it's become a thing, and they're so much fun. And we interview the coolest bands. And then every now and then we'll throw a curveball in there. Like this Friday or tomorrow, as of this recording, we have an episode on Taylor Swift coming out with another podcast that only talks about Taylor Swift. So it's kind of a mixed bag. We try to do it in a funny way, because we weren't alive for when most of these bands were famous. And we do it in a way that we try to tell an unbiased history of these bands, because we kind of get to look at it objectively. We weren't there when what was happening. Yeah, I think that's it.
Now, having listened to some of your episodes, there is, and I'm not even like, joking around when I say this, there is a ton of research in these episodes. How much time do you spend going through and culminating your notes?
We pretty much start as soon as we wrap a recording session. So we'll record a whole month's worth of content at one time. So we'll record Beth Ann's episode and then immediately go into my episode. And then pretty much the next day, we'll start researching the next artist. It becomes crunch time the week before an artist or before an episode recording. Like we're recording on this upcoming Wednesday and I haven't started my outline. But there's like casual research. You're listening to other podcasts who have covered them, or watching documentaries, or reading books. And you have to condense it all into one little 10-page-ish outline.
So going into an episode, do you purposely choose artists that you are not familiar with, so it's kind of fresh, and if that's the case, do you find almost like okay, now I want to learn more, now I want to listen to more?
It's kind of both. There have been some artists where when we very first started the podcast, like day zero, we made a master list of dream artists we want to cover, and every now and then we'll consult that list and pick one off. But sometimes we call it signs from the universe. The universe will tell us what to do. Like upcoming, I'm going to do Bonnie Raitt. And we just interviewed an artist who I was kind of on the fence about doing her. And we interviewed Jay Madison, and they cited her as one of their biggest influences. And I was like, well, now that's my sign. I have to do Bonnie Raitt. But so if we're familiar with them, it does make the research a lot easier. We have a lot more to go on, but we've fallen in love. We joke that all of the artists that we individually cover become our children, because you kind of get possessive over them. Like when I see Rolling Stones stuff now, I'm like, that's my artist. And I think Beth Ann feels the same way about Prince. And so it's kind of helped us expand our knowledge base and our horizons.
So if you do happen to go into an episode where you are familiar with the artist, you've listened to them, you like them, does doing that much research actually take away from the enjoyment of it? Like, do you have to kind of pull your fandom out of it?
I don't think so. I've always been the kind of person where if I'm interested in a band, I go deep diving. So it's just like my normal fan behavior to obsessively research an artist when I like them. So I don't think it takes away from it. It almost makes it easier, because these hidden gems that you may not find. Like, for example, we did Queen. One of my favorite Queen videos is an outtake from the studio where it's one dump, two turds, instead of in the song One Vision. And like the casual researcher is never going to find that, but I think it's hilarious. And I knew I had to put it in there.
You realize I'm not going to get that lyric out of my head now every time I hear that song.
Go watch the video. You'll never hear the song again, but it's hilarious.
Now, how much do you share notes kind of like, before recording? Like, do you purposely withhold your research just so you get that honest, instant reaction? And how often do you and Beth Ann actually surprise each other with the factoids that you do find?
What you hear is our 100% genuine reaction. We do not see each other's outlines. They're chilling in the same Google Drive, but we don't look at them. And so when we record the episodes, whatever you hear is what's happening in the moment. Pretty much at least once an episode, there's kind of a what the hell moment, or they really did that. And so that's the benefit. Also, we record in the same room, which is not super common among podcasts. And so that's the live reaction of us in the same room sharing these stories.
I was about to say, like this last year and a half through the pandemic, of course, everyone is doing everything remotely. Did you guys pivot to a remote recording session when everyone was told to stay home?
No, we took the first month off so that April time span, we kind of just were like, maybe we should put this on hold till we figure out what's happening. We did do one remote interview via Zoom, but we're set up to record in the same room. We're not set up to record via Zoom. So it didn't sound super great like we're used to. And then we just kind of decided, we're going to be each other's bubble because we were both working from home. We weren't really going anywhere. And so we just made the decision that we were going to be careful and just sit. We sit on opposite couches anyway when we record. So we were still social distancing. And it did make it easier for us to do artist interviews, though. We got an influx of artist review requests during the pandemic because they were looking for something to do. And they were already using Zoom for other things. And so it wasn't like we were having to explain Zoom like we would have had to been previously before the pandemic. And so we just that was the only real change. Now we bought Zoom mics, but that was un-pandemic related.
And as you mentioned before, you're starting to have like an influx of artists now as far as like interviews go and whatnot. So how has the progression been from those early days of the She Will Rock You podcast to where you're at now, where you guys are starting to become very much in demand as far as interviews go?
Yeah, it's very weird because we started 2 years ago, and at the very beginning, it was here and there. A band would find us. They'd say, "Hey, can we be on the show?" We'd give them a listen, decide if they, fit the vibe of the show, because we have some hip hop artists and R&B artists reach out, and I'm like, "Did you read the show description?" And so it was maybe one every 2-3 months, and then at the very beginning of the pandemic, I reached out to the lead singer of my favorite band, The Struts. And I was like, he's doing these Instagram lives with people. The worst he can say is no. And I DM'd him and he said, sure, I'll be on the show. And then once we had a big name like that, we could reach out to other medium-sized artists that we actually were fans of and wanted to interview. And it kind of snowballed from there. Some different management agencies have been reaching out to us repeatedly when they get new clients that fit within our wheelhouse. And now we've gone from one interview every, 2 or 3 months to right now we're booked out on interviews through the end of August.
So when it comes to deciding which episode you're going to do, whether it's going to be a research-based one or an interview-based one, is there one that you, as you as a podcaster, prefer to do?
I like both. They each have their own fun things. I like the research aspect of things, and obviously our research episodes are more polished, but doing interviews is so much fun. We never know what's going to happen. We never know what they're going to say because I don't want to say we go in blind. We do our research before we interview them, but a lot of these artists don't have other interviews to watch or listen to, and so you don't get a good feel for their personality until you're sitting there talking to them face to face. I don't know if I could pick just one format to do.
Now, let's talk about you and Beth Ann. So obviously, longtime friends. How did the idea of starting the podcast get started?
Yeah, so we started working together, I want to say 4 years ago now. We worked at the same marketing agency. Neither of us works there anymore. But we we quickly became friends, and we got in trouble all the time for talking to each other, like elementary school stuff, to the point where they physically separated our desks into two separate rooms because we had an open floor plan office. And that didn't really stop us. And so we kind of kicked around the idea of a podcast because Beth Ann's a really talented audio editor and had been thinking about it for a while. And I just like to talk. And so we couldn't really nail down an idea. We thought about doing, the first iteration was a Disney podcast because we both really like Disney movies. But there's so many of those, and we don't live close to a theme park because we live in Virginia. So that was a terrible idea. And then we came really close to doing a weird news podcast that's just like those crazy stories that have no real impact on human society, but they're just like interesting pieces. But that would require recording way too often. We like our record once a month and then have, just content spread out. And then one day we were hanging out with our friend Lauren, and I got an alert from bands in town that a Fleetwood Mac cover band was coming nearby. And I said, "Oh, Beth Ann, we should go see Rumors. They're this like highly rated Fleetwood Mac cover band." And Lauren turns around because she was driving the car at the time. She goes, "Who's Fleetwood Mac?" And Beth Ann and I just looked at her, and I said, "Is that what we need to do our podcast on? Rock history? Because people like Lauren don't know who Fleetwood Mac is?" And so that was kind of the original intention, was to just tell rock history to people our age, but it's kind of grown beyond that to just telling it to people who either weren't interested in that specific artist, if they were alive at the time, or telling the just the fun facts that you may not know if you're just a casual listener.
As an indie podcast, one of the things that kind of comes to mind is the drive that's needed in order to keep it going, because it's not sponsored. There is no money in the indie podcast. So the drive is pure passion. So what is it that drives the two of you to keep going and to keep building up what you've built so far?
Part of it is the connections that we've made. We've met the coolest people, just other podcasters, artists, audience listeners who listen to our show. Part of it is there's always another story to tell. As soon as we cross one name off our list, I think we add 6 more. And so it's kind of like a topic hydra. It's never going to run out of topics. Sometimes I think, what if we run out of topics one day? And then I'll think of 20 bands we haven't covered, and that's a whole year of content there. And we generally love doing it. We just like hanging out, and it gives us an excuse to hang out in person once a month and talk to each other. And we never really cared how many people listen, but it's really cool how many people listen to us.
One of the other nice things too is that, anyone who's putting content out into the internet, whether it's a podcast or a YouTube channel or whatever the case may be, there is, a lot of good compliments to come in, but there's also a lot of crap. But every time, I've seen anyone mention your show, it's always been super positive, super, super encouraging. So how has the reception been, and how has that, boosted your spirits in continuing this?
With the exception of one review that we've gotten, it has all been positive, which has honestly been surprising. I think a lot of female podcasts especially just get a lot of hate mail from people who don't like them. But every single review we get, I screenshot immediately because I check every morning because I'm a data nerd and I have a spreadsheet that calculates different running totals of things. And I'll screenshot it and send it to Beth, and I'm like, look at this nice thing this person said. Every single review, we read it and we get excited about it. And that's pretty cool.
One of the other good things too is that you're very much a part of the indie podcast community, especially the music community. You're constantly guesting on other podcasts. You are having other podcasters come in. So how much does that community mean to you?
This is actually a very new community for us. Like within the last 3 months, I made our Twitter 2 years ago when we started the podcast, and the podcasting space on Twitter was very cutthroat, very not friendly, very small, very big podcast oriented, kind of hating on the smaller podcasts. And so I never put a lot of effort into Twitter. I would maybe remember to tweet that we had a new episode and never thought again about it. But for some reason, a couple months ago, I revived our Twitter and was met by the nicest people who genuinely care about lifting like each other's podcast up. As soon as one of us releases a new show, as everyone in that little sphere is tweeting, "I loved your new episode. Listening to it now," and it's so cool to be a part of that community.
And then to be invited onto other people's podcasts, except for this one, I'm just thankful you came on. But but to be invited to other people's podcasts and then to have people come onto yours, like, do you feel like that community is really starting to strengthen because it's the indie community and because you're having apps like Good Pods and websites like Podchaser really kind of build up everyone as an indie podcaster to work together?
Oh yeah, definitely. We're actually trying to come up with ways to be more creative because our show format doesn't necessarily lend to having guests on our show, but we want to repay the favor of the podcast who have let us come on their show. So we're trying to think of really cool bonus episodes that we can do with other shows to kind of boost them up as well. Right now, we're just kind of adding their promos into our shows, which is something, but I want to do more.
Now, of all the episodes that you've done so far, is there who's still on the list as far as research goes? And is there one guest that, if you could kind of put it out into the ether right now and have them, appear on your podcast, who do you need to research and who do we need to have on your show?
Well, I crossed up my big bucket list when we wrote out the goals of the show was to have Luke Spiller from the Struts on our show, and that happened last year, so we're good there. Anybody else would just be icing on the cake. But as far as artists I want to cover, I really want to cover Guns N' Roses because I haven't covered them yet. A lot of my dream list of topics to research are rule breakers. I literally texted Beth Ann this morning and I was like, can I have permission to do a Spice Girls episode in the future? And so it's a lot of rule benders. Our Taylor Swift episode was actually one of those big checklists that comes out tomorrow. And so when I have an idea, I just run with it. I don't put it off for years and years and years. So that's been pretty cool to have the creative control that we have over our show.
All right, we are talking with Leah Jones from the She Will Rock You podcast. We're going to take a quick little break, listen to one of our friends, and then we'll be back with Lee just after this.
We're going to take it back a little bit, back to 1992.
Oh, yeah, that song. It was almost on my list, but it just didn't make it.
All right, you're bringing in wrestling references now.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to bring in a little bit of everything. I heard that song so many times at a strip club.
Who hasn't heard it at a strip club?
I'm sure it's being played at some strip club right now.
I know it's a Christmas song.
Yeah, you went weird on this, Brian. I'm sorry.
Bro, this is left field, man.
I don't care. It is such a great song.
What's up, everyone? This is Gomez.
And I'm Brian.
And we're the dynamic duo and co-hosts of Playlist Wars,
a podcast where we, along with a special guest, pick a musical artist, band, or topic, and each create a 10-song playlist that we feel best represents them.
Then we turn it over to you to vote for which one of us got it right.
You can find us at playlistwarspodcast.com
or wherever fine podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the Made You a Mixtape podcast. We're talking with Leah Jones from the She Will Rock You podcast because it's podcast to podcast day here on the show. Now, let's start talking about you and your love of music. When you were growing up, what was on the CD player or what was in the tape deck for Lee?
A lot of very random things. When I was making my mixtape, spoilers, I was trying to think back of the songs that were in my childhood, and it was a very eclectic mix. So my grandparents that I spent a lot of time with, because they lived literally across the street from me, were only into country music. They only ever had country music on in their house, which I was very, very into until 2009. My parents are both 70s babies, and so they listen to a lot of 80s music. I cannot remember a time when we didn't have our local 80s, 90s, and Today radio station playing in the background. They still have it playing in the background. They still play Hair Nation every time I go to their house, and we're having dinner. But I was also really into musical theater growing up, and so I had this weird mix of country music and 80s music and Broadway music that just kind of bleeds through my life.
So basically, if Garth Brooks starred in the theater production of Rock of Ages, gotcha. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
But so like for your parents, like, when, like maybe driving in the cars, like kind of thing with your parents, what would they typically put on the radio?
My dad listened to a lot of Guns N' Roses. And he likes really heavy metal with screaming, which I do not like. I always made him turn it off. To this day, I hate screaming in metal. And then my mom, she really listened to a lot of top 40 stuff. My mom has really cool taste in music and really modern taste. Like even now, I'll get in her car and she's playing the Pitbull station on Sirius XM, and I'm like, who are you?
Do you remember, and I like to ask people this because I always find it fascinating, do you remember the first time, that you went to a record store with your money, not just like, I got this album for a birthday gift or whatever, but actually going to the record store, your money, buying an album for yourself? Do you remember the first time you did that?
I do. And I'm pretty sure it was the Lilo and Stitch soundtrack in 2006.
I'm just trying to picture what was actually on that album.
It was a lot of Elvis. There's 2 original Hawaiian songs. There's a Winona Ryder of Elvis, or Winona Judd cover of Elvis, and then there's an 18s cover of Elvis. It's a lot of Elvis.
Yeah, I can picture that. I can kind of picture that.
The CD skin actually looked like a record. They had kind of, put the black, and then where the paper would be, it was like a Hawaiian print.
Now, I mean, as a lover of music, and of course someone who, obviously you do because you have a music podcast, how has this last year and a half been, as far as not having live music to kind of go out to?
It has been very sad. I had several concerts lined up that got postponed, which thankfully are rescheduled in a couple months, and I'm very excited about it. Nothing excites my soul more than live music and live theater, and not having that was really, really depressing, to the point where when I volunteer at our local arts center, and they did a kids production of Moana Jr., and I volunteered at it. It was last August, like right when things were starting to cautiously open up. And I remember I was crying watching these kids who I don't know perform live theater just because I had missed it so much.
Loving live musical theater as much as you do you prefer it when bands put a bit of a theatrical tilt to their music?
100%. I like singer-songwriter stuff. Like, I like listening to it. It's not my favorite show to go to because I don't want to say it's boring, because it's not boring, but it's not engaging. My favorite acts are very theatrical and over the top and interactive with the fans, and not just, I don't like when artists just sit there and play their music.
No shoegazing.
No.
If you had your choice to pick one album and turn it into a musical theater production, what would it be? I'm putting you right on the spot right now.
Yeah, this is hard. I'm trying to think. One that might be really interesting would be Paramore's Riot.
I could see that, actually.
I think you could make a story out of that. It's got a good enough of like a crescendo and a couple slow songs that there's a story arc in there somewhere.
But as far as concerts go, and I'll preface this by saying that we are recording this mid-July, and it was just announced that the Foo Fighters, who had performed at Madison Square Garden, now had to postpone another one of their shows because there was a COVID case in their organization. How much do you think we're going to have almost like a start-stop to this? And do you personally, as a concert goer, have hesitation of going to a large venue surrounded by a lot of people?
I don't, because I am fully vaccinated. Whether other people are or not, that's something I will never know. I would rather take the risk and get live music back up and going, which kind of sounds selfish. I'm sorry. But I'm cautiously optimistic for these fall shows that I have scheduled. I feel like they may get paused, and we'll just have to deal with that when we get there. I'm going to be incredibly heartbroken if this happens. I'm doing a 4-show road trip for the Struts, and if that happens mid-trip, that's going to be a little interesting, but I guess we'll find out when we get there.
Of bands that hopefully will get back to touring again, who's on the bucket list? who do you need to go see now?
Well, that's a hard question. Let me think. I can tell you have tickets for, but that's not necessarily who I want to see, like, big picture. I am blanking on every artist I know right now. I'm staring at this curtain like it's going to help me. This is a weird one, but I really want to see Kenny Chesney.
Have you ever seen him live, or is it just
I
one
have
of those?
not.
Okay, so he's definitely on the bucket list then.
He's in the bucket. So is Keith Urban. Like, there's some country artists, because I was in middle school when I was last like really invested in country music. There's some that I still need to like go back and check off.
Now, when it comes to, because you mentioned Sirius Radio a lot, you know, so how much do you prefer listening to satellite radio as opposed to terrestrial radio?
I actually don't listen to any of our local radio stations because they suck. So if I'm listening to radio, it will be Sirius XM, but 98% of the time I'm listening to my own creations on Spotify. Choose your own destiny. I'm too indecisive on what I want to listen to sit and listen to a straight genre for more than 30 minutes.
Okay. Putting it out there. If you had the possibility to have the She Will Rock You podcast syndicated on any of the Sirius XM stations, which station would you prefer to have it on? And if you can't just pick one, go ahead and pick two. But which station do you think She Will Rock You should be on?
I feel like the alternative station. I can't think of what it's actually. I think it's just called alternative.
Like
they don't have
Alt Nation. I think it is. Yeah.
Alt Nation. They don't have a cool name like some of the other ones, but I think that one, because they're one of the Sirius stations that gives more of I don't want to say indie artist, but a smaller artist platform. So I feel like we fit in there.
And like, how often do you sit down and listen to other podcasts, like as opposed to just listening to music?
A lot. I was realizing the other day that I haven't used Spotify to listen to actual music in like 3 days because I've just been listening to podcasts. I do try to listen in Good Pods at times, but I listen in my car a lot, and the Good Pods skip button doesn't work on my dashboard, so I have to like manually skip on my phone. I'm skipping through ads. Sorry, I'm not listening to your ads, guys. But I do listen to a lot of podcasts. I cannot work in silence if I'm folding laundry or cooking dinner. And I probably listen to 20 hours of podcasts on a good week.
When you take a look at the numbers as to where podcast listens come from as far as a source, whether it be Apple or Spotify, you're starting to see the rise of, things like Podcast Republic and Good Pods and Podchaser. Do you think that, whereas before Apple and Spotify were kind of the bastion of podcasts, do you think that the tide is starting to turn and that ears are really starting to move towards the indie podcast? Because, okay, well, we've heard the celebrity way too much. Let's hear some fresh voice.
I definitely think so. I think at least once a day I see Twitter likes to serve up, recommended tweets for you to see. And at least once a day I don't want to see Joe Rogan's face ever again, because Spotify just pushes that podcast. And Apple, I never use Apple Podcasts anymore because I like everything tracked in Spotify. But Apple just broke their podcast player. Like, it's impossible to find new pods, and people are constantly looking for new things because they run out of episodes to listen to, or they're on a hiatus. And so I think especially Good Pods with like the discovery features they're adding is going to be a huge move in the future of podcasts. They also need to stop giving every celebrity a podcast, in my opinion.
Now, and I do have to point out too that as of the recording, She Will Rock You is the #1 listened to music podcast this week on Good Pod. So, Congratulations for that one as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so now it's come to the point where we have to ask you, Lee, it's time to pull out the research, because if you had to introduce yourself to a total stranger, but instead of saying, "Hi, I'm Lee. I'm from the She Will Rock You podcast. Listen now." You hand them a mixtape, and on that tape are songs that tell the story of you. What songs are on that tape, and why are those songs there?
Let me pull up my Spotify playlist that I made.
Oh, you put it on Spotify.
I did.
Oh.
This is just my thought process. I was like, I have to see it listed out. Okay, so this was really fun to make because I specifically chose songs that I have like a vivid memory of or like a really strong connection to. And a lot of them are songs I haven't listened to in years. So I was listening to it on the way home today and jamming in my car. So up first, I have Boondocks by Little Big Town because I had to throw a country song in here. Every time I hear this song, I think of summer nights at my grandparents' on their porch, like catching lightning bugs, and you can smell the honeysuckle flowers that they had growing on their back porch, and it just takes me back to my childhood. Number 2, I have Real Gone by Sheryl Crow, which is on the Cars soundtrack. And I also remember walking into Target and buying that soundtrack with my own money.
I'm sensing a Disney soundtracks theme here.
This is the only one. I limited myself to one Disney song. But I think I was 12 or 13 when that movie came out. I was really I still love the movie Cars. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. It's adorable and I love it. But that song, I remember I was like right on that cusp of being a teenager, and I thought that I was so badass listening to this song. Which, saying that out loud is kind of embarrassing. Next, I have 2 is Better Than 1 by Boys Like Girls featuring Taylor Swift. I specifically, every time I drive this one highway near where we live, I think of this song because when I started dating my now husband, when I was 14. So like high school sweethearts. And there was one Friday, I guess, after school that he said we're going to go on an outing. And he took me to this lake and we had a picnic. And I remember driving back home. It was really sunny and warm. And the song started playing and we had the windows down. And it was just very like cheesy teen romance stuff. But every time I either drive down that highway or listen to the song, I think of that day. Next, I have Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses. Because this is one of the first songs. I remember my dad teaching me how to download on LimeWire. We downloaded this and the Sheryl Crow version, which is also a good version. And this is like the moment that I pinpoint as really loving that era of music, like the Guns N' Roses, the Journeys. He's the one that taught me those and helped me illegally download them.
That's good parenting right there. Yep.
Yeah. Hey, he didn't want to pay for them either, so do what you do. And he's the one who got me the large iPod video that had all the storage, so we had to fill it up.
Hey, I have on this podcast, admitted my Columbia House shame, so I can't really say anything.
We did what we had to do.
Yeah.
I always say that if 13 and 14-year-old me had access to Spotify, I would probably be a different person. But that's another story. Next, I have Misery Business by Paramore because the summer before I started high school, I listened to this album exclusively for like 3 months. I know it backwards and forwards. I was obsessed with this album. There's no good story there. Until I got rid of my iPod video, it was the number 1 played, like all 11, 13 tracks were all the like top spots on my most played songs. Next I have We Are Young by Fun. May they rest in peace. They were one album wonder, then they broke up. And this came out when I was in college, and this song was constantly playing when we were hanging out with our friends and partying or studying, and it just always takes me back to that time. And speaking of hanging out with my friends, Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen. Because there's this story in our friend group where we all got drunk one night at the beach, and I don't know why, but we had Bohemian Rhapsody playing and we all were singing it at the top of our lungs to the point where the neighbor came out on his porch and watched and filmed us and then applauded us after. And now I can't listen to Bohemian Rhapsody without thinking of that night.
By the way, if that video out there still exists, yeah.
I don't remember who took it. It was someone that we were at my parents' beach house at the time, and it was someone there, and I don't know who wound up with the Snapchat video, but I need to find it. Next, I have Could Have Been Me by the Struts because they are my favorite band. Lyrics from that song are tattooed onto my arm. If you're watching the video version, there's a wall of Struts memorabilia behind me. It's it's not even my favorite song of theirs, but it's probably the one that means the most, if that makes sense. It's just about, live your life, do what you need to do when you want to do it. Don't put things off until tomorrow and think that it could have been you having, the success or the good times. And hearing this live for the first time, I'm pretty sure I cried because it was just, that was the concert I think I've been the most excited for in my life. And seeing it was magical. Next is Start Me Up by the Rolling Stones, because they were somewhere around episode 6 of the podcast. That was the episode that I felt like we finally knew what we were doing as a podcast. Like, we were in a rhythm. People were actually listening to us. We had hit our stride. And then finally, I have Long Story Short by Taylor Swift, because that kind of just sums up the last year and a half of, the world's going to hell, but we survived. We made it on the other side, and everything's going to be okay.
Now, you mentioned that you were a big Cars fan, and, I also know that you're a big Marvel fan as well.
Yes.
So watching the season of Loki, how much did you want Owen Wilson to just come out and say Ka-chow?
I really did. I actually shared a meme in the I have not watched the finale yet. I'm doing that after we record. But the scene, someone edited the scene where he comes in with the little car to be Lightning McQueen, and it was like, he's my variant, and that's one of my favorite memes to come out of that show.
You've said in the show that you're a bit of a data geek where you kind of compiled everything and whatnot. And as a creator, one of the things that, of course, is there for you to analyze is the analytics of how your podcast is doing. How much do you look at the analytics of your show, and how much do you have to kind of push yourself to not look at the analytics of the show?
So I like looking at them. I look at them every morning. I do a check-in. I have a spreadsheet. This sounds so nerdy. I have a spreadsheet where I have our number of downloads, our followers on 3 social media platforms, how many reviews we have, and then there's one other thing that I don't remember off the top of my head. And I started doing that because I had no baseline when I was randomly popping in, and you read the number of downloads and you're like, I have no idea what it was yesterday. So that could be 200 more. It could be 2 more. I don't know. And so I just needed a way to visualize it and see things change from day to day. And it's been really cool to see how they change from day to day. But I do have to remind myself not to stress about it. If, we had 50 downloads yesterday, but we only had 2 today, what happened?
How hard is that, as a content creator, when you see the numbers and it's like, today was a good day, yesterday was a not so good day. How hard is it to not allow those numbers to affect you?
It's kind of hard because we had one episode just take off. I think it got shared it was our Carpenters episode. And I noticed all the traffic was coming from Facebook. So I think it got shared in some kind of fan group. And I was like, all right, this is it. This is our ticket to getting a lot of downloads. They're all going to subscribe and be religious listeners. And then it literally went back to, like, not flatlining, but very close to the bottom. And I was like, okay, that's not how it works. Got to remember that.
And when you're taking a look at the data, do you also see where the podcast is listed to, not just as far as platform goes, but as far as countries?
Yeah, we use Anchor, so it won't let me look at a certain time span. I can only look at the overall year and a half we've been hosting with Anchor, because we used another platform previously. And it's kind of hard to drill down on there because it's so much data and it hasn't really changed. But what I have been using is Chartable to see where we're charting. And that has been the weirdest thing. We're charting in countries that I didn't even know people were listening to us in. We were number 1 in Sweden in music history for like 3 weeks straight. We hit number 1 in Japan. And I'm just like, how are you finding us?
Now you need to, to get She Will Rock You Big in Japan shirt.
Yes.
It needs to happen.
We were number 1 for like 2 hours on the music history charts in Japan.
She Will Rock You live at Budokan.
Yes.
For anyone who's sitting down, listening to this episode, listening to you talk about, creating this podcast from the ground up, what would you say to someone who's sitting there who has a podcast idea, who wants to kind of, do their own thing?
I say just do it. I'm an impulsive person. I do plan things, but I'm pretty impulsive. Like if we had just waited until we were ready or felt research enough or felt like we knew enough to do it, we would have probably never started it. If you listen to our first episodes, like the content's great. The audio is okay. We recorded in a really echoey basement. We learned our lesson. But plan out just to where you would have enough content for 6 months, reevaluate at 6 months, but just do it. Like, just go for it.
Leah Jones, thank you so much for this. Where can we listen to the She Will Rock You podcast, and where can we find you on social media, and what's next for you guys?
So you can find us anywhere you get podcasts. If you find somewhere that doesn't have our feed, let me know and I will make it happen. We should be pretty much everywhere by now. You can find us. We have our website, shewillrockyou.com, which has links to all of our socials. But if you want specifics, it's She Will Rock You Podcast on Instagram and She Will Rock the letter U pod on Twitter because of that character limit. And then what's next? We have a lot of artist interviews coming your way. I've gotten some really cool stuff coming down the pipeline there. I don't want to give names just in case they end up bailing last minute because that happens sometimes. But and I'll let you guys be the first to know that after I do Bonnie Raitt this month, next month is ABBA.
Oh, nice. Nice. Lee, thanks so much for this. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to the Made You a Mixtape podcast. If you're listening to us in an audio streaming service, you can watch this entire interview and see the full Struts collection on YouTube. But if you're watching us on YouTube, hi, you can go listen to us on any of the audio streaming platforms, especially if you're in Japan, because they're big in Japan. This is the Made You a Mixtape podcast. I'm your host, Jason. We'll see you next time. Take care.